Uh-oh. Something happened to my Zoom. The sharing didn't work.
We could see it, Paul. Now
Okay,
we can't.
we'll try again here. All right, did we get Cheryl Bruno?
Yep. You're there.
All right. So we'll set up the slideshow then. I welcome you all this evening, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, friends and family yet to be. It is a pleasure to have the Book of Mormon Perspectives Forum gather with the enrichment of friendships that in some cases have spanned 65 years. In some cases, they are newly developing, and in either case, it is a blessing to have friends. Cheryl Bruno is our speaker or presenter this evening. She's a writer, a poet, and an independent researcher living in Marina, California, and I presume that that's where she's speaking from tonight. We'll let her affirm that. She does. That puts her a couple hours behind those of us in the Central Time, but notice we have Aspie on, who's from Belgium, and so it's already tomorrow morning there for him. And so we're Belgium to California tonight. That's a pretty good span. Her book that came out this week, Method Infinite, Freemasonry and the Mormon Restoration, shows that Masonic legend and allegory can be read as foreshadowing the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. She has also written about the Strangite Masonry. She's gotten into the Enoch story and the story of Charles Thompson and Preparation, Iowa. That's one I find particularly fond of too. The Harley P. Pratt story, William Marks, Wilford Woodruff, and Harry Potter have all been the subjects of the articles that I have found on her. This evening, she'll address us with the connection of Freemasonry with the story of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. And so we welcome Cheryl Bruno to the forum and invite you to allow her to present and then give her the best questions and answers afterwards. But let us pray. Creator of the minerals composing earth and stone, of the atomic structure of muscle, blood, and bone, composer of the symphony of universal sound, we bow in appreciation that your awesome mysteries abound. For you create and have created so much more than we can know. Yet we appreciate that we can contribute and nurture our children and watch them grow. We see the waves of history, embrace them with our might, yet only snapshots of our probation survive through our dark night. For we are inclined toward violence, senseless as we have learned, instead of claiming peace as the way our ancestors have yearned. When we approach you this eve, in prayer we humbly bow, in part to ask your blessing on our presenter, Cheryl Bruno, in part to ask your spirit to help us learn your way that our children might live in peace in Zion in their day. But primarily we recognize you are God. We are people created by your hand. And we want to pay respect, to look again at where in your creation we stand. To say thank you for life, for love, for the sense that you do not leave us alone, as through the mystery of history, on ways of creation, we are born. In the name of Jesus, whose hand we find extended in our every need, we pray, amen. Cheryl, the floor is yours. I hope I've got the forum open for you, and please take it away.
Hello, everyone. So
Hi.
good to be with you tonight. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can share my screen as well. Let's see. There we go.
There it is.
Okay. Are you all seeing that?
Yes.
To the law.
Okay. So what I wanted to talk about tonight is a little bit about the coming forth of the Book of Mormon and Masonic correspondences in the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. My book that's come out this week, which I have written with two other authors, is all about the pervasive influence of Freemasonry throughout the Mormon Restoration, starting even before Joseph Smith's life, in the life of his father, Joseph Smith Sr., and having influence in his life as a young man, even as a young boy, and throughout the entire his entire life, really. So as we conclude, and it becomes time for questions, you can ask questions on many aspects of Mormonism or Freemasonry and Mormonism, but I had to kind of cut it down to just a little portion of what this book was all about, because it's so all encompassing. And so I've chosen to just choose the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. So, the culmination of the young Joseph Smith's treasure-seeking efforts was the discovery of the gold plates, inscribed with mysterious characters requiring a special key to translate. From this sacred record, he would later claim to translate the Book of Mormon. Joseph found the plates concealed in a stone coffer buried in a nearby hill on neighbor Randall Robinson's property. There it is, the Hill Cumorah. 'Twas there, impressed with holy awe, a gold engraven plate I saw, with dazzling splendor shine. To us, the grand elect, alone, its secret characters are known, ineffable, divine. This poem, written in 1823, seems to describe Joseph's discovery perfectly, yet it is actually a Masonic ode, depicting one of the legends of the craft. We all know the influence Freemasonry had upon Joseph Smith and Mormonism years later, in 1840s Nauvoo. But have we fully explored the correspondence between Masonry and the story of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon? And why do we see this borrowing so early, at the very beginnings of the establishment of the church? Narratives of the discovery of the Mormon gold plates share similarities with the lore of Freemasonry, most especially that of the Holy Royal Arch. Masonic legend and allegory can be read as foreshadowing the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. In ancient craft masonry, especially its fourth and culminating degree, the Royal Arch, several traditions of loss and recovery coexist. So I have three of the traditions right here in front of you. In the first, the biblical prophet Enoch inscribes a sacred word and mystical characters on a golden plate. He hides it beneath Mount Moriah in the Ark of the Covenant. It is to be discovered at a future time by the will of God. A second legend in the middle there tells how King Solomon recovers the word, a sacred name which can only be shared in the company of three royal companions. When one of the three dies, the word is lost. Finally, the third one we're talking about tonight, in an American Royal Arch version of the story, three companions are set to work on the restoration of Solomon's temple after the Babylonian captivity. During their labors, they discover Solomon's secret chamber and recover Enoch's plate of gold, together with another treasure, the Book of the Law, which was the means by which the entire Jewish nation was restored to its understanding of its covenant with God. The story closely parallels the biblical account of King Josiah's restoration of the temple, when the high priest Hilkiah discovered the lost Book of the Law. So I wonder if many of you know about these Masonic traditions. I saw that at least one person on here, Jason Smith, I saw you, is a Freemason. Wondered if any of the rest of you have a Masonic background.
That'll be easier to see when we have the gallery view. So that probably will come up at the end.
Okay, well, maybe we can talk about it at the end too when we do the Q&A. But many of you will not have this background, so I talked a little bit about these three legends. These Masonic legends imply an established pattern of loss and recovery, apostasy and restoration. By recovering the Book of Mormon, Joseph Smith literalized what in Masonry is symbolic and allegorical. The narrative of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon derives from many sources, some of them written years later than the actual events. Mormon writer and historian Dan Vogel states, Joseph's evolving accounts of his 1823 encounter with the angel make it difficult to recover the core story. In his tellings, he freely recasts events, continuing to add material and to introduce concepts in order to meet later needs. Moreover, his accounts and those of his family and friends often display certain disparities. Nonetheless, it's interesting to note correspondences in these accounts with Masonic legends. At some point between 1823 and 1833, a Masonic connection with these events was forged, and later narratives appended details, apparently to augment the relationship. So it's interesting to me that the accounts of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon often have Freemasonry included in them. And sometimes it comes in later. And so some people say, well, that that was just a later retelling of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. And so we can't really read back this Masonic influence. But I think it's interesting, even if they were telling the story much later, why did they bring in the Freemasonry? So hopefully this presentation will talk a little bit about that. So a fundamental preoccupation of speculative Freemasonry is the mystical significance of Solomon's temple and all of its appurtenances. Masonic scholars appropriated the Christian tradition of 5 holy items. Oops, there we go. 5 holy items which were kept in the Sanctum Sanctorum, recasting them in a symbolic and particularly Masonic framework. The first was the Ark of the Covenant. The other 4 were supposed to be enclosed. They were inside of the Ark of the Covenant. In the reenactment in the lodge, in the Masonic lodge, the high priest opens a replica of the Ark to show the contents to the candidates. He ceremoniously removes a very ancient-looking book, reading the first and last words in the volume. The principals then simultaneously exclaim, "This is the book of the law, long lost, now found, holiness to the Lord." Next, the high priest brings out of the ark a little pot with manna, Aaron's rod. Let's see, we got the Ark of the Covenant, then the book of the law, the pot of manna, Aaron's rod, and the key to the ineffable characters of the degree, by which adepts could obtain the hidden meaning of every passage. So I say that all of these 5 appurtenances correspond to something in Mormonism. So we have the Ark of the Covenant. These are 5 corresponding particulars in the story. The Ark of the Covenant is the stone box that the Book of Mormon was found in. The gold plates were found in. The Book of the Law are the gold plates themselves. The pot of manna, I say, corresponds to the Liahona. Aaron's rod is the sword of Laban. And the key is the Urim and Thummim. So I'm going to tell you why I believe each of these parallels. Okay, so we have the number 1 is the stone box, or the Ark of the Covenant in Masonry and the stone box in Mormonism. In what would later become the official church history, Joseph described the discovery he made on the hill Cumorah. The plates lay deposited in a stone box, he said, under a thick rounded stone of considerable size. Clearing away the debris which had accumulated around the edges, the young smith obtained a lever which he fixed under the edge of the stone, and with a little exertion raised it up. Royal Arch commentary contains some possible symbolism included in the above story. The working tools of a Royal Arch Mason are identified as the crow, pickaxe, and spade, literally used to loosen soil, prepare it for digging, and remove rubbish. These are used emblematically for more noble purposes. By them, the speculative Mason is first reminded by the crow to lift the heavy weight of passions and prejudices from his mind. The pickaxe prompts him to loosen the hold of sin and folly on his life, while the metaphorical spade impels him to remove the rubbish of vice and ignorance. Joseph Smith shared in the Christian Freemasons' anxious concern to reform his character and build a more perfect spiritual life. Here's a quote from Joseph Smith. "I often felt condemned for my weaknesses and imperfections." He confessed that as a young man, he frequently fell into many foolish errors and displayed the corruption of human nature. Besides, Joseph was warned by an angel that he could not obtain the plates if his heart was impure. In common with the Royal Arch tradition, which it echoes, the account of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon may be read as allegory. Here one perceives elements of Smith's own struggles to remove the dirt and rubbish from his life, to confront those flaws he felt marred his own character, and to bring forth truth from the earth, to recover from deep within himself something true, authentic, and holy. So that's our first particular. And accounts written by Oliver Cowdery and Orson Pratt in 1835 and 1839 also characterized the covering stone as an arch, and specifically mentioned 3 small pillars upon which were placed the records in the stone box. The symbolic importance of these architectural elements, an arch and pillars, are of profound significance to Freemasons and symbolic on many levels. The surface details of the stone box are remarkable and powerful for those familiar with Masonic lore. Concealed by an ancient prophet on a holy mount, deposited beneath an arched stone and resting upon pillars. But more strikingly, each of these elements skillfully enhances and amplifies the Masonic themes of loss and restoration, inherent in the legendary history of the craft. To Masons, pillars suggest a divine repository, as well as a great and important undertaking. The threefold pillars, representative of the Trinity, additionally hint at the idea that God himself has preserved the record and provided the means of translation. In Freemasonry, the keystone of an arch suggests the word of God, both in the sense of the person of Jesus and the scriptural record he embodies. Joseph Smith would later inseparably connect the keystone with the book of the law, which he had recovered. And here's that famous quote: "I told the brethren that the Book of Mormon was the most correct of any book on earth and the keystone of our religion. And a man would get nearer to God by abiding by its precepts than by any other book." And just this phrase, the keystone of our religion, is very Masonic. So now we get to the number 2 is the gold plates themselves. Similarities between the golden plate of Enoch and Joseph Smith's golden plates also go far beyond simple physical correspondences, that they were made of gold and found in an excavation under an elevated mountain. The 2 mountains were named respectively Moriah and Cumorah, which is very similar. But Enoch's mountaintop vision of a triangular plate of gold is a veiled allusion to the Visio Dei, the vision of God, which is the summit of the Christian's journey, and its promised reward of divine transformation and glorification. Additionally, it is a symbolic representation of the Word of God, both the record of Scripture restored to mankind and also the glorious person of Jesus Christ, the living Word. For Latter-day Saints, the story Joseph Smith related of his own experience on a mysterious mountaintop in upstate New York mirrors this Masonic legend. In both cases, God showed his approval of the prophet by a personal manifestation and the restoration of his word. Overt Masonic connections with the Book of Mormon plates continued to be made in much later sources. An alleged 1830 interview with Joseph Smith Sr. was published 40 years after the fact and contains a close portrayal of the gold plates. Under the first plate or lid lay the spectacles, and on the next page, he said, were representations of all the Masonic implements as used by Masons at the present day. Here, Freemasonry is directly tied to the golden plates. It actually said, Joseph Smith Sr. actually said that these, the plates had pictures of the Masonic implements on them. Okay, so now here's the number 3. So in the Masonic tradition, it's a pot of manna, and in what I'm relating this to is the Liahona. Masonic tradition holds that one of the distinguishing particulars kept in the Ark of the Covenant was a small pot of manna. This peculiar substance with the Hebrew name of manhu, what is it, was found on the ground outside the tents of the children of Israel and helped sustain them as they crossed the wilderness. In Mormon folklore, this is replaced by the Liahona, a round brass compass, which Lehi discovered at the door of his tent the morning that he and his family commenced their journey into the wilderness outside of Jerusalem. Like manna, the Liahona continually reminded its bearers of the providence of the Lord and who was directing their journey. Modern Mormons often associate the Liahona with a navigational compass because it contained a spindle which pointed the way whither they should go into the wilderness. That's 1 Nephi 16:10. However, it is clear by the text that the instrument did not work in the way of a magnetic compass. Now, we tend to picture the Liahona as it was first portrayed by artist Arnold Freiberg. As far as I'm aware, we had no pictorial representation of the Liahona in Mormonism before this painting was commissioned in 1950. Now artists are heavily dependent on it. Personally, I can conceive of the Liahona in no other way. And when I picture that Liahona, I pictured this picture right here of Lehi holding that little brass ball. I don't know about you, but that's a picture in my mind of the Liahona. But another possibility is that the Liahona resembled a set of Masonic compasses. Not that first picture there, but the compasses underneath, which are Masonic compasses. These, along with the architect's square, are one of the most identifiable symbols of Masonry. Both the square and compasses are used in Masonic ritual to teach symbolic lessons. The Liahona is described as having 2 spindles within the ball, calling to mind the points of the architect's compasses. As described in the Book of Mormon, they worked according to the faith and diligence and heed which Lehi's family did give unto them. In Freemasonry, the compasses hold a similar allegorical meaning. They circumscribe and keep us within bounds with all mankind. Number 4, Aaron's rod and the sword of Laban. In the second half of the 19th century, a teaching about a cave within the hill Cumorah began surfacing in the writings of several leaders of the church. Brigham Young recalled that when Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery returned some of the gold plates and the Urim and Thummim to the hill Cumorah, the hill opened and they walked into a cave in which there was a large and spacious room. He says whether by the light of the sun or artificial light, that it was as light as day. Young stated that there were many wagon loads of plates in the room, and that the sword of Laban, which had originally hung on the wall, was laid upon a table across the gold plates, with the inscription, "This sword will never be sheathed again until the kingdom of this world become the kingdom of our God and his Christ." Or Wilford Woodruff, another Latter-day Saint prophet, had an account which words it, the sword would never be returned to its scabbard until the kingdom of God was reestablished upon the earth, until it reigned triumphant over every enemy. Thus, like the Masonic version of Aaron's rod, Laban's sword suggests that nation born in a day. Remarkably, even apparent late embellishments to the story of the obtaining of the gold plates exhibit a consistent mirroring of Masonic thought. Brigham Young's cave, light as day, with Laban's sword atop a holy record, emulates the legenda of the Holy Royal Arch. Here, the sacred plate of gold was discovered only when the sun, having gained its meridian height, darted its rays to the center of the vault beneath the keystone they had removed, and shone resplendent upon the holy relic. Okay, here's our last one. The key and the Urim and Thummim. Royal Arch Masonic tradition spoke of a key which was found with the curiously wrought box. This key, subject of many Masonic lectures, is both literal and symbolic. It could not only open the box, but it was the means whereby the mysterious characters on the plate of gold might be read. For Joseph, that key was the Urim and Thummim, a revelatory device and a creative expansion upon a Masonic theme. Like the key in Masonry, it is found within the box together with the mysterious characters upon the gold plates. His identification of the interpreters with that Masonic key is seen in Lucy Mack Smith's account of the discovery. "Mother," said Joseph, "do not be uneasy, all is right. See here, I have got the key." Lucy said that what Joseph termed a key was nothing more nor less than the Urim and Thummim. In his 1992 book, Joseph Smith's Response to Skepticism, author Robert N. Hollinger rightly observed that many elements in Smith's history were familiar to Freemasons. However, he also assumed that Joseph invented his account from whole cloth. This overlooks the possibility that Joseph described a genuine experience, informed by family and cultural exposure to Masonic legend. Masonic references could well have been included to further elucidate the significance of the events. So many people are afraid of connecting Freemasonry with Mormonism because they think that that will kind of prove that Joseph Smith did not have an actual spiritual experience, or he did not actually recover gold plates, but that he stole it all from Masonry. And that is not what I believe, and that is not what we say in our book. You can have either, actually you can have either point of view and still recognize the Masonic significance in and correspondences. The legendary history of Freemasonry is a metaphor of a latter-day restoration of true religion. The elements of the tale, a delving into the depths by means of interior illumination to recover and restore something lost, are described in Carlyle's Manual of Freemasonry as moral similitudes of material things. Freemasons are frequently admonished to reflect upon the moral significance of these symbols and allegories, which comprise its various degrees. Smith, I believe, did just that. Joseph Smith did just that, as he literalized Masonic allegory and made it into reality. The coming forth of the Book of Mormon is intimately connected with the backstory of the Royal Arch degree and its discussion of the discovery of the Book of the Law and the restoration of true religion. The symbolic nature of these elements fit into Smith's witness of this uniquely American Book of the Law. The use of Masonic language in its history demonstrates that the coming forth of the Book of Mormon was seen as a fulfillment of Masonic expectation. Later accounts written by Smith's family members and close associates perpetuated the Masonic elements, often extending and intensifying them. So as time went on, they brought in Masonry even more. The fact that later writers put the story in Masonic terms without prompting from their deceased leader suggests that they too understood the cosmological significance inherent in the craft. Smith and his 19th century followers saw ideas in Freemasonry, which expanded the mind and prepared it for religious salvation. So let me go on just a little bit. From the book that I wrote, I'm going to talk a little bit about, because I wanted to get into what many people believe, that the Book of Mormon is anti-Masonic. And the research that I did showed that at the time of Joseph Smith's, hang on. Sorry, I'm getting a little dry here. Okay, I hope I'm going to be able to continue to speak. Okay, so lots of people say that the Book of Mormon was anti-Masonic, and there are some newspaper accounts in the time period where they did say that the Book of Mormon was anti-Masonic, but just as many newspaper accounts say that the Book of Mormon was Masonic. So there was a little bit of confusion going on at the time of the Book of Mormon's restoration, that people didn't know what to make of it. They didn't know if it was Masonic or anti-Masonic, and I think a lot of people nowadays feel the same way. But in the book, I explain that there is the way that Joseph Smith conceived of Masonry that can explain this. And I believe that he thought that there was a true Masonry that once existed that had become corrupted. And in the Book of Mormon, he talks about secret combinations, and he talks about these other things that are, I believe, his idea of the corruption that Masonry had sunk to. And he also talks about Masonry in a positive view. So he talks about the authentic Masons, which were Nephi and Lehi, and the ones who had priesthood going back to Adam. I'm sorry. I'm really having trouble here. Okay, so I just want to make sure that people realize that when you look at the elements in the Book of Mormon, you can see both things. You can see Joseph Smith believing in an authentic Masonry, and you can also see him believing in, just as true Christianity devolved and became apostate, Joseph believed the same about Masonry, is that it was once a pure form, and that it had become corrupted over the years. And he believed that he was there to restore pure Masonry as well as to restore pure Christianity. So now I'd like to open it up to you guys, and I'd love to hear about any of your experiences with Masonry, and to answer some questions.
Commonly get that as the first privilege, and so I will, but let me remind people to go to the reactions button down at the bottom of the screen. And if you hit the reactions button, then that will allow you to bring up the raise hand, and Deb commonly follows carefully to see who's in order to speak next. So let me begin with my first question. I really have several, but Joseph Sr., you mentioned. Hiram, you didn't, but I understand both of them were Masons comparatively early on. And the implication is that you're suggesting they influenced Joseph Jr.?
Yes, and also as well as he having family members who were Masons, who were Freemasons. Masonry was prevalent in the culture that in which Joseph Smith lived, and I don't think we realize that today because there are many people that just don't know anything about Masonry. But you couldn't have lived back then without knowing quite a bit about Masonry, quite a bit about even the things that they keep secret in their rituals, because those things were being especially after the Morgan affair, which was a kidnapping of a man who was revealing Masonic secrets. People became there became quite a large group of anti-Masons who would go around the country and try to reveal the Masonic secrets. And right, even in Joseph Smith's own neighborhood, there were anti-Masons who would come by and do like a reenactment of the Masonic rituals so that everyone could see exactly what was happening in Masonry. So Joseph Smith would have known quite a bit about Freemasonry even from being a young boy, both from his family members and also just from the culture around him.
You mentioned the Morgan affair, and if I recall correctly, Morgan's wife became a Mormon?
I'm sorry, say that again.
I understand correctly, Morgan's wife became a Mormon.
Yes, she did. Lucinda Morgan married a man named George Harris after Morgan died, and they both became Mormons. They moved to Missouri, and some say that Lucinda Morgan was one of Joseph Smith's plural wives.
I see Mike waving his hand down there. Mike, go to the reactions and get on. Give you a chance too. In the meantime, I get to continue to dominate things. You mentioned the circumscribing of the compass, and I just was intrigued because we have Rainbow Eagle on, and the healing of the sacred hoop has been one of the themes that's been recurring in our Perspectives Forum. You're suggesting the healing of the sacred hoop is not only Aboriginal, but then Masonic as well.
Yes, yes.
Did you want me to say something about Lucinda and
Yeah,
Paul?
great.
John Thompson and myself published an article in the John Whitmer Journal. I'm trying to think of the year now. Anyway, about what the possible trigger that brought about polyandry, because she would have been the first polyandrous wife of Joseph Smith, and it probably happened when they were staying at the home. Joseph stayed at their home in Far West in 1838. 4 years later, according to Sarah Pratt, Sarah was upset because Joseph had basically approached her about becoming a polyandrous wife as well. And Lucinda sort of laughed and says, well, I've been his mistress for 4 years, so that would be 1838. Anyway, there's been a lot of discussion about when and they became involved with each other. So, but it's a good article if you like it or don't like it.
We allow all perspectives here. Thank you. Hey, raise your hand, ladies and gentlemen, and get in on it. This is a fascinating resource with a fascinating perspective, and I think most of us are. Well, she asked earlier about those of us that are Masonic, have that background, and if you would care to identify yourself that way, it would be a pleasure to see the commonality in those roots. Don't see any volunteers.
Monty has his hand up. Monty, did you want to respond to that, or did you have something else?
Well, I was just had a comment about 50 years ago. I had a good friend who was a Mason, and he ran a youth variety show that I was a part of. And I was down in his basement one time getting ready for rehearsals. And we went over to his bookcase and I happened to see a Masonic Bible. And I thought, well, how's that any different than the other Bibles? And so I opened it up, started looking at it. And he ran over, snatched it from me. He said, "You have any idea what could happen to me if they caught you with that book?" And I said, "No." And so they put a fear in him. I don't know whether it was real or not, but anyway, he didn't appreciate me opening up his Bible. So when we went to the Masonic Lodge to do the variety show, at the end of it, I said, "So mote it be."
Well, I think that probably it sounds to me like you might have picked up a book of ritual. There are
It was
Masonic.
something that he treated like it was hot as a newborn horseshoe.
Yeah, they don't like to reveal their ritual, just like Latter-day Saints don't like to reveal their temple ritual either.
How closely associated are those?
There are several close parallels in the Mormon temple and the Masonic ritual as well. I think people like to, when they're talking about Masonry and Mormonism, they like to jump right to the temple and talk about the different correspondences between Masonry and the Mormon temple, because there are certain things that are quite close. But I don't think you can understand those things unless you understand the pervasive influence that it had all through the years. You can't just go straight to Nauvoo in 1840 and talk 1842 actually and talk about Masonry. You have to understand how it came along through the years and how Joseph Smith was developing these Masonic rituals and Masonic organizations all throughout his life.
Mm-hmm.
Cheryl, there's a couple questions in the chat box.
Okay, I see. Let's see. I see that I don't know if I can get to the ones above. I'm seeing the one that, okay, there we go.
Can you see the one that Michael put in about the hill? as
About
a
the hill,
drumline?
yes. So Michael says the hill is a drumlin, which is a geological feature formed by the receding glaciers at the end of the Ice Age, and there would not be any caves in such a feature. So I'm not sure that I often take Brigham Young with a grain of salt, so I'm not sure that I really believe in a literal cave in the Hill Cumorah. But also, isn't there someone that's doing archaeological work, Mike, in that hill and found like not caves, but like passages in there? I can't remember.
I don't know. Maybe they'll write something up for the the John Whitmer archaeology series on it.
Yeah, I mean,
If there was a cave, it wouldn't be a cave. It would be it'd have to be a hand dug.
yeah, I think that's what they were
Human.
finding.
It'd be human.
Yeah.
But so a cave would be a misnomer to use that kind of terminology.
Yeah.
Oh, Cheryl, since I'm on, you were talking about the influences. Some people have drawn comparisons to the Danites and the use of oaths and
Yes.
and communication. Oh Lord, is there no help for the widow's son? That kind of thing. And yeah, so and that's in 1838. So that's even earlier than the Nauvoo temple endowment ceremonies. So
Yes.
You're right. It's kind of continuous throughout the time period.
Right. So I have a chapter in the book about Danites, about that period of time. And I believe that Joseph Smith with the Danites, and I do think that Joseph Smith was involved in creating the Danites, and that he was very closely involved with that. And they of course had these secret oaths that they would, that they would take. And I believe that Joseph Smith was creating creating Mormon ritual with the Danites, and that was like his first experiment on creating this ritual. So you'll have to read the book and see how I expand on that. I'll talk
This
about the
is the
Danite.
Danite distress signal right here.
Yes, there was a Danite distress signal, and that was used at the election in Gallatin. Actually, we have quite a bit written about it. John D. Lee and others have written about that.
Okay, Ron Smith and then Rainbow Eagle. Go ahead, Ron.
Well, my question is kind of off to the side here. In terms of the compasses, have you given any thought to how a compass would not work with two spindles? I mean, how you would know it wasn't working as opposed to how you know it was. That's something that I've always wondered, and I don't know. I just wondered if you thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, I have thought about it, but it's hard to, it's hard to even imagine in your mind. The only thing I can really imagine is that that ball that Arnold Freiberg has described. But thinking of those compasses coming out, and just being able to turn it different ways, and more of an architectural kind of tool. I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah, okay. That certainly puts a new spin on compasses, but
Yeah, well, it's interesting to think about that idea, just to, that it's a different way of thinking about it than we ever have. So. I have a question over here. Says, do you cite Don Bradley's work where he compares the items in the Ark and the Covenant and Nephite sacred relics? The sword of Laban seems to have a parallel with the sword of Goliath, not the Masonic belief. So I, of course, see more of a parallel with the Masonic tradition, but others, I know Don Bradley makes a pretty good case for his view as well. Jason wanted more about the idea of pure and spurious masonry. Jason, did I already answer your question, or do you want even more about that?
I just thought you might want to explain a little bit more of it.
Okay. So I believe that Joseph Smith was a Masonic restorer, and so there was in his mind, there was a pure masonry that existed from the beginning, from the time of Adam. And so he felt that over the years, masonry had been corrupted, and several Masonic writers wrote about this, that through the Egyptian period, masonry became corrupted. And so when Joseph Smith saw the way masonry was in his time, and especially the William Morgan affair, and how people were saying that masonry had become corrupted, he just felt like that it was his responsibility to restore it to its pure form. And I feel like that's what he was doing in Nauvoo with the Nauvoo Lodge, making so many Mormons Masons. He was trying to bring masonry in, and with the Masonic lodges, in the Mormon Masonic lodges, he was going to have enough people and enough influence that he could eventually have a Grand Lodge that was Mormon, and he would be able to change the very rituals of masonry and to restore them like he was doing with Christianity.
Rainbow Eagle, it's your turn. Oops.
Yeah, I can begin to kind of place myself in that circumstance of the 1830s, 40s, and 50s. And the concern I have is that there easily would be attitudes of regular people about secrecy and rituals being done behind closed doors, and an attitude of elite, and also the attitude of masculinity could be kind of a flavor that the regular person would begin to have some real ill feelings and anger feelings for a church that is including that particular kind of secrecy and behind and rituals, and how that those two things, to me, just amplified the attitudes toward the church, the early church at that time.
Mhm.
How would you react if you were a woman and that you were seeing a masculine leadership in both the church as well as in the masonry business? That would really, raise the level of anger, I would say.
Okay, well, the first thing that's interesting to me is that our country was really kind of founded on Masonic ideals, and back in the beginning of our country, the 1700s and early 1800s, many people thought that this influence of Masonry made men better and helped them be good leaders, and brought men together as equals. So we had a totally different idea of Masonry before the Morgan Affair. Now, after the Morgan Affair, people started to have the same concerns that you just mentioned, that perhaps Masonry had too much of an influence in politics and all of the other things that you mentioned. And Joseph Smith, I think, was cognizant of these things. In fact, the Relief Society, as another chapter in our book, talks about how Joseph was bringing women into a Masonic-like organization with the Relief Society. So he was kind of addressing some of these concerns.
That would be a no-no to bring women into that particular organization at that particular time. That would be a red flag for sure, seems like.
Well, it seems like it, but actually, even before Joseph Smith, there were co-Masonic groups where women were participating in Freemasonry, not in the men's groups, but in parallel Masonic groups. So I do also talk about that in my book, and Joseph Smith wasn't doing anything against what other Masons were doing. And a lot of people, I have heard a lot of people say that Illinois Freemasonry did not like the fact or protested against the fact that Joseph Smith was bringing women in, but I have not found that in my research at all. I have never found any protests that are contemporaneous that Joseph Smith was bringing women in. I think that that was something that was already happening and that people were okay with. So.
Are there women today in the Masonic order?
Yes, there are Masonic orders, women's Masonic orders, and then there are also orders where men and women participate together. But in the male Freemasonry, women are not allowed in the male lodges.
Then there's the sense of hierarchy, a way of determining those who are better than or having a higher position than, that would be in conflict with trying to bring religion into people's life. It's almost like the Catholic begins to kind of designate who has the better hat.
So as Freemasonry was originally founded, this was a way that men could meet together. They call it on the level, meet on the level. So a janitor could come into the lodge and sit with a lawyer, and they were both men, they were on the level. One was not higher than the other. the janitor could become the master of the lodge, and serve as master of the lodge. But then later on, it could flip flop. So the way Masonry was originally conceived, it wasn't necessarily that way. But I know that later it was criticized for being like
It
that.
just seems to be a conflict of interest to have these two things that Joseph Smith was trying to, balance out or to include. I didn't grow up with that particular kind of knowledge of that nearness or that inclusion of Freemasonry.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I think our book is going to be very transformational, because a lot of people just don't realize, one, the effect that Freemasonry had on the society at the time, and two, the effect it had on Joseph Smith. I mean, I think we make a very good case for it in the book. And whether you're going to believe it or not after reading it, I think it will open your eyes to a lot of things that you never were taught, as
So what aspects of the Freemasonry is evident today in the church?
Very little. It's gradually gone out. Well, when after Joseph Smith died, and the saints, the Latter-day Saints moved to the West, and then the other groups scattered all over the place. Brigham Young, let me start with Brigham Young and then I'll go into the others. But he decided that they would not continue to be Freemason, raise up Freemasons. And one of the reasons why he didn't want to was because he felt that when Joseph Smith was being martyred, that he actually gave the Masonic sign of distress as he either leaped from the window or fell from the window, that he gave that Masonic sign of distress, and that the Masons did not answer him. And so Brigham Young felt that that was kind of a separation, that now they would not be part of Masonry. Some of the other groups, I include this in one of the final chapters in the book, continued with Masonic elements, especially James Strang had lots of Masonic elements in his. Charles Thompson did, and the Reorganized Church did not include very many Masonic elements, although, was it Frederick Smith was a Mason and he joined several Masonic organizations and was very involved in them, but didn't particularly bring it into the church. So so Masonry sort of fell out of favor in the Mormon groups, and we don't see much influence in it today. There is a little bit in the temple ceremonies, the Mormon temple ceremonies.
Yet in the Mormon church, there's a considerable amount of ritual and secrecy and eliteness that certainly has a flavor of the Masonic way of doing things.
Yeah, there's a little remnant there. Yeah.
Mhm.
Rainbow Eagle, were you done?
Yes, I think so.
Right. Paul, you're next.
Thank
and
you
then-
for your questions.
And then Monty. Go ahead, Paul.
Thank you. I did want to follow up on Rainbow Eagle. And first of all, let me express my gratitude that the wealth of information that you're able to provide, because you detect from the questions that there's a wide interest, and people are, well, I was just about to ask you about the Strangite connection, because we've got William Shepherd with us this evening. On the other hand, I'll say that you've already addressed that, at least in a cursory fashion. And let me go back to Rainbow Eagle's comments, because I'm struggling with how Joseph Smith have produced the Book of Mormon with its very strong emphasis to avoid secrecy, secret combinations, and then to employ them with the day-nights and beyond.
Paul, you need to speak up so we can hear you
Yeah,
good.
it's a little hard to hear, but I think I caught your drift. So you're wondering how he could condemn these things in the Book of Mormon, like secret combinations, etc., in the Book of Mormon, yet then later develop a Danite type of organization, which seems to also be a secret combination. And my answer, this goes along with the corrupted form of Masonry. I think that Joseph Smith felt that he could do it the right way, so he could, when he restored the organization, he could do it the right way, and that it wouldn't fall into the corruption that it did in the Book of Mormon.
I think he was mistaken. All right. I'll yield the other hands.
Monty, it's your turn, and then Rick. Go ahead, Monty.
One of the things that's always perplexed me is people's attitudes about the life of Joseph Smith. Some folks considered him a loon right from the beginning. Some people believe that the Book of Mormon is scripture, and that Joseph Smith did, as he said, translated it from the gold plates. And then when we get to Nauvoo, all of a sudden you've got things like translations of another book called the Book of Abraham that everybody kind of waffles around and says, well, that may or may not be what happened and stuff like this. And, I don't have any trouble accepting the fact that he translated the thing. It doesn't mean that it's scripture, but the fact that he translated it is possible. But, a lot of folks have trouble with it. What seems like him going off on a tangent when he got to Nauvoo and instituting several new programs that weren't really a part of the original movement. And, I kind of have trouble with that myself. I feel like maybe towards the end of his life, the pressures had been too much on Joseph, and he was just trying to do what he could. He was just a human being like everybody else, put his pants on, one leg at a time. And some people try to deify him, and I don't go along with that at all. I was mouthing off about this at a wedding reception one time. The guy sitting across the table from me said, "I couldn't agree with you more." And that was Wally B. Smith. So anyway.
Well, the interesting thing to me is that if you look at it through my perspective, through this Masonic lens, you might see a little different story, because Joseph Smith was starting very early with this Masonic influence and to make these ritual organizations. He starts with the School of the Prophets in Kirtland. He goes on with the Danites, and all the way up to the Council of 50 in Nauvoo. It sort of follows a similar arc. And so rather than seeing him as going off very differently in Nauvoo, it's a continuation of what he was already doing. That's one way to look at it. And that's kind of how my book does present it.
Well, I just have trouble dealing with all the different concepts of Joseph Smith. I think he may have at least at one time been a prophet and seer, and may have gotten off on a tangent later on, because there seems to be such a dichotomy between what the church was when it started and what the church was when it split up. And I just think that he got off on too many other issues that had really nothing to do with what God was trying to get him to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
I'm through. I spoke my piece.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Rick, and then Michael Riggs. Go ahead, Rick.
Okay, I got myself unmuted. It's like pulling the tape off of my mouth.
There
Ouch.
you go.
Thanks, Cheryl, for presenting. And I didn't know there was such a theory out there. So you educated me on what is out there. You know, the compass not working. You know, you see these videos of people going flying over the Bermuda Triangle and their compasses, you know, just kind of spinning,
Mhm.
not maintaining magnetic north. So that's kind of the way I look at it. You know it's not working because it's not staying still. Could you briefly explain how it got the term Freemasonry? The free
Okay.
part?
Yeah, so this masonry started back in the Middle Ages when we have masons, operative masons who built buildings, right? And so they had the system to know each other, to tell if someone had been actually trained in masonry, and they could bring them into the project. And they did it by different hand grips and secret words and that kind of thing. So that's how it started. And then gradually they started to like speculate on their working tools, that they would say, you know, the compass is like this, the square is, you know, a symbol of blah, blah, blah. So when they started to do this speculation, then other people became interested in some of the things they had to say. They were interested in antiquity. They would bring in some of ancient things, and so there were many men that wanted to be a part of all the speculation and this interesting symbolism. So what they did was they allowed these men to come into Freemasonry, and oftentimes it was because they supported them financially too. So they made a distinguishing between operative masonry and speculative masonry, which then they called Freemasonry. So Freemasonry is a little different than just the, you know, the building aspect.
So
of it.
would Freemasonry be like a public outreach or a public interaction to inform the public, people that are interested? And then
Well,
once you're interested, then you get moved into speculative masonry?
I don't think it was ever really public, but they did bring in others who weren't of the building craft, that were just interested in the things that they were interested in, the antiquities and so forth, and the symbolism. So
Okay.
that was about the 1700s, and they just went from there, and they developed rituals and organizations to support it.
Okay, thanks. My next question is, how do you deal with the secrecy of, and the secret oath, secret handshake, secret organization that is Masonry, and the Book of Mormon, which has many verses that say they're not of God, and they're really authored by the devil. I mean, I've got 3 here, Helaman 625, Helaman 626, and 4th Nephi 142 in the LDS passages. And so I just wanted to know how you work. It's sort of like what Rainbow Eagle was saying. How do you get around this, I don't know, lack of a better word, condemnation of secret things,
Got it.
both in Masonry and perhaps in the Mormon ritual.
Right.
And so that would be my problem for myself, becoming a Mason, knowing the Book of Mormon and all the things that are said negatively about secretness.
Right. So I think probably one way that people have done this is to realize that when the Book of Mormon condemns the secret combinations, it's condemning the way this is used, not necessarily the secrecy per se, but just the way that it's used for corruption. And you can see that in those passages you mentioned, that the combinations are getting together to do evil things, and that doesn't mean that they can't combine to do righteous things. As I said, the Nephites were kind of Joseph Smith's, I think, perception of the pure masonry, and they got together to build a temple, and so this is something that they're doing that will be for good. So I think maybe that's just one way that people can look at it and be okay with the secrecy. Occultism, we use the word occult in a negative way to think about maybe like devilish, but the actual word occult just means hidden or secret. And there are hidden or secret things that, one of the doctrines in Mormonism is that sometimes people aren't ready for a certain doctrine. And so it's revealed line upon line. And so it has a secret component that, is not revealed until that person is ready. So secret seer occultism is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just the way that it's used that can be condemned.
Okay, so I guess to see if I'm understanding correctly, secrecy is not necessarily bad if it's done for a good reason.
Pretty much, that's one way to look at it. Yeah.
Okay. My other question about this mystery G that is in the middle of the square and the compass.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to reveal what the G stands for, or do you know?
Well, I mean, I don't think I can tell you one answer for that because it's not always the same for many people. It means different things in Freemasonry. So a lot of symbols are like that in Masonry. They're kind of open, and different people can interpret them different ways. So one
Okay,
might be God, in the name of God.
Yeah.
Somebody might interpret it that way. So
Could I be safe in interpreting it Gaddy Anson?
I have never heard that one before.
Well, okay. Well, he had a secret society too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for opening my mind a little bit more about how Joseph could have been involved in it and fixing it up. So I'll yield to the next person.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Rick. Michael, you're next. Go ahead, please.
Great. Cheryl, it's a good perspective to talk about Joseph in the 1830s and early 40s with his intent to try to restore both Christianity and Freemasonry. In perspective now, scholars would look at, as you mentioned, Freemasonry starting in the Middle Ages. It's not something that went back into before that time.
Right.
So, that doesn't work too well. I think it was really informative to proto-Mormon Masons who were now Mormon, who were being introduced to this. It wasn't alien to them. To most LDS members today, when they go to the temple, sometimes they're a little blown away the first time because they're being exposed to Masonic rituals that they had no concept of. But people like Charlie Pratt and stuff, that was, okay, I get it.
Right.
So I understand that. But also scholars today who study early Christianity, and it's not Christianity, it's Christianities. Because there were many, many manifestations of it, the early Jesus movements, would say, Joseph Smith's structure that he came up with, which was supposedly a restoration of it, doesn't resemble really anything in early Christianity, any of the Christianities in the early period. So, but it is reflective of his time and his understanding of what his work was, what he was trying to do. But that's instructive in and of itself, that that's where his mind was, is in the 1830s and early 1840s, before higher biblical criticism, before, you know, Masonic historians come along and kind of screw it up. Anyway.
Well, I think you make a really good point about the people who participated in his ritual in Nauvoo were very familiar with Freemasonry, and oftentimes had gone through the Masonic ritual first before they went through the Mormon ritual. And I think it gave them an understanding that we don't have, that Mormons don't have as they go through the temple today. I know that I am a Latter-day Saint who has gone through the temple, and I did not understand a lot of those things until I started studying Freemasonry. And then I started getting an idea of what was supposed to have been communicated through some of this ritual that you just don't learn anymore because it's been lost. So
I was a reader once upon a time at the Huntington Library out in California, and in the stacks I came across a privately printed pamphlet. I think it was just for Masons, and it had the ritual, and this was from the 18th century, and it was so different than how it evolved into the 1840s, you know. And Joseph is working off of the 1840s and version of it. And if you would think, if it's sort of like peeling the onion to get back to historically, what he would have been restoring would have been something that was a lot more simplistic, because that was the earlier manifestations of the Masonic rituals. Jason might be able to comment on that some, I don't know, but or you, Cheryl. But it just seemed to me, you know, I remember picking that up and looking at it and going, wow, this is pretty different.
yeah, I mean, I don't think he had any conception that he was restoring a Freemasonry like the early, you know, version of Freemasonry as it was. And he was restoring really a legendary form, going way back to Adam, which was this legend, you know. And in his mind, this was reality, that he did not realize that Masonry didn't go back before the 1700s or the yeah, I mean, they've had a very different conception of Masonry in Joseph Smith's day.
One last point, I just really wanted to, and I haven't got a chance to get the book. I'm hoping there's going to be a good discount at the John Wayne.
Okay.
But since I'm coming, but how do you guys deal with the statement in the First Relief Society meeting when Joseph says, "I'm going to make you good Masons because Masons know how to keep secrets"?
Yeah.
It seems like my writings that I've talked about, I discussed that a little bit in terms of him having spiritual capital that he was giving to these women. I'm going to make you goddesses, but you're going to keep your mouth shut, basically. And so anyway, how do you guys deal with that?
So I feel like there were many different organizations that had these oaths and the secrecy, and this Joseph Smith used them to bind people to him. Like there were many men who were Danites, and then they were, you know, part of the quorum of the Anointed, and then they were Council of 50, they were in the Nauvoo Legion. All these things had these tendencies to bind these men to Joseph Smith. And the Relief Society was very similar, is, you know, you got in this organization and then you were his, you know, his person, you know, you had made promises, you'd made covenants, and you were all in. And I think you're right that, you know, this is something that he's doing, that he has this loyal following, and the ritual was one of the ways that he did this.
Michael, were you finished?
You're
Okay.
muted, Michael. You're
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
All right. Paul and then Robert. Go ahead, Paul, please.
Your last comments again are very closely associated with what the question that I was trying to formulate. But I had the privilege of attending a Masonic funeral for one of my neighbors, friends, and I was amazed to see a gentleman in an apron who was conducting the ritual, who was in the normal society a very low class person. But as you indicate, Masonic people apparently saw all of labor as equal. And that struck me as being a very favorable image of the Masons when I attended that funeral and saw that. But then when you see the binding of people to Joseph Smith in a real cult, everywhere from the march across the Midwest to independence, and then all the way up into the Quorum of 50 and establishing the Book of the Law of the Lord. I mean, these themes that you cite really come through and are a profound influence. And yet, when you get to things like promoting women into goddesses and men into gods, it doesn't seem like a very equal system. How do you reconcile that basic sense of equality that appears to be a fundamental theme of the Freemason and the hierarchy that develops out of the Mormonism?
I think there are different ways of looking at it, and I don't necessarily see, I mean, there is a hierarchy in Mormonism. However, you don't have to, it's like you can come from a very humble background and become a bishop or stake president or a general authority, or you know what I'm saying? It's not necessarily a system of hierarchy that discriminates against certain people. Does that make sense?
But the offices of priesthood are given, so the elders have power to do virtually everything that anybody in the Aaronic priesthood is scheduled to do. And so the Aaronic priesthood tends to be a very lower class system.
I mean, of course I can see that point of view, but I can also see that, the other point of view. And also, this is a system that has really developed independent of Joseph Smith as well. I mean, it's not exactly the same system that Joseph Smith, I think, was setting up. But there are many ways to look at it.
Thank you.
Again, Cheryl, we've got about 6 or 7 questions in the chat. I don't know if you want to
Okay.
address it.
Okay, let's see here. Let me go
Back to the one problem with the cave story and the sword of Laban is that they could read the writing on the sword. Do you think that the sword of Laban had English writing on it?
Okay, I personally, I mean, it's asking for a personal thing here, but personally, I don't believe the sword of Laban was a actual artifact. So I just feel that it was kind of a symbolic story. So I don't know. I believe that it did not, probably symbolically didn't have English writing on it. It wouldn't have had English writing on it, but I think if I get myself into the story, I would say that you can read the writing on the sword through, the spirit, right? Also, Joseph Sr. described the sword blade as being severely corroded with the gold hilt and chain intact. I don't know. I don't have much to say about that. Okay, let's see what else we have here.
We'll get to Robert here.
I'm sorry?
I say, go ahead. We'll get to you, Robert, here in just a minute because your question's coming up.
Why do Mormons state that it is not secret, it is sacred? And what is connection with Freemason? Well, Why do Mormons state it is not secret is sacred? I think what they're trying to do with that little word play is to just say that the connotations of secret are, you know, like trying to keep things or hidden, or they just want to avoid the bad connotations of the word secret. So they put it into the word sacred, which sacred just could also mean secret, but it's connected with something holy. So I mean, that's why I think they say that. Just to avoid those connotations of secret is bad, but sacred is good. What is the connection with Freemason? I think what you're asking there is I don't know. Can you tell me exactly what you mean by that?
Aspie, that's you.
No. No. Oh yeah, maybe I already answered that when I talked about how Freemasons, what the word Freemason meant. Is that what you were asking?
Maybe that's Jason. Jason, did you ask that? Is Jason still on?
Jason's saying that the G can stand for either God or geometry. Rick is saying, I don't like symbols open to interpretation or those revealed to higher level degree Masons. Oh, okay. So that's, to me, that's kind of cool that there are many things that happen by degrees. And Masonry is very symbolic in that it happens by degrees. So it's not like that I hear a lot of people talk about Freemasons as being like a scary thing because you get involved in this lower level and then later on you find out that you're bound to the devil or something. But really that's not what happens in Freemasonry. It's more like the concept of you learn a little bit at a time, and as you're ready to go on, you know, in your learning and your progression, that you can learn more. And I think the secrets that are the secret rituals in Freemasonry are not something scary. They're just teaching you something about your inner self and how to connect with deity in a more complete way. So yeah, I don't know. You could be involved in something not plain and precious, but in my study of Freemasonry, I don't see that.
Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and let Robert go ahead and ask his question because
Okay.
he's been trying for a really long time.
Okay.
Go ahead, Robert.
Well, it's not really a question, it's more answers to questions that have been raised. And first of all, let me just reveal that I am secretary of Hancock Lodge number 20, located in Carthage, Illinois. We received our charter in February of 1843. And I think it's been well established that some of our charter members were also served in the Carthage Greys, the militia,
Right.
of some note. And I've
Yes.
sat in lodge with Nick Watursky, who I think you know, Cheryl.
Yes, our co-author. Yes.
Right. And I know he was always interested in all the esoteric things. I'm much more, sorry, that's my cat deciding she doesn't want a part of this. I'm much more of a practical person and don't think so much about the kinds of things that you've talked about tonight. But I can tell you a number of things, at least about what currently exists in Masonry in this area. And you should be careful to understand that the ritual is different in each state. There are some very central, I think call them landmarks of Masonry that are common to all of the lodges, at least in this country that I know of. But the ritual itself can be quite different and interesting. So with respect to equality, Paul, you were talking about that. When the person in charge of a Masonic lodge is called the worshipful master. Worshipful really is a name, a title from Old England. It's not so much that everybody's bowing down to him. And in fact, when he receives his charge, it's at his installation, it's made quite clear that he is to preside for a time and that he's not to be raised above his fellows. But somebody has to be in charge, and he has a great deal of authority about conducting the lodge meetings. And there's an election every year of the top officers, including the worshipful masters. So it's something that cycles around, and it isn't like, well, certainly in many of the church situations, we're used to priesthood offices are held for essentially for life, although well, I won't get into that, but essentially for life. And that's not the way the offices in a lodge are done. So the Masonry starts with what's known as the Blue Lodge, which is the base of all of the male Masonic organizations. And there are 3 degrees in it. And when somebody says they somehow got to be a 32nd degree Mason, well, that's not too hard to do, really. But what you have to do is to join one of the other bodies, such as the consistory or the Royal Arch or the shrine. All of those require membership in the Blue Lodge with its 3 essential degrees. With respect to women belonging to the lodge, there is a separate Masonic organization called Eastern Star, which has both male and female members. And it's not a replica of the male organization, but it in terms of ritual, but it does have lots of similarities. I belong to a young men's organization called De Molay, for Jacques de Molay, who was involved in the Knights Templars during the Inquisitions. The young women have 2 organizations, one called Rainbow and one called Job's Daughters. So all of those organizations kind of make it confusing, I think, for people when you're talking about Masonry. And then let me just make one observation, and that is, if you do things in secret, it heightens other people's interest in it, and it creates a vacuum of information which draws all kinds of things into it, that some of which are, most of which are not related to what's actually going on. So at any rate, that's my contribution.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll mute Robert. Rainbow
Okay.
Eagle, you are next. Go ahead, please.
What is real helpful in what you people do is the real deep study of things, so that there is an effort of being able to step completely more into the circumstances that you have studied and what we have grown up with, and we're learning a whole lot more about the situation. Certainly being able to find and recover something of the real, whatever that effort is. At this moment, I can imagine what Joseph Smith must have been like, because it seems like he had so many irons in the fire that he was trying to navigate and make into something. And then I've just had a recent visit to Carthage. The story that seems to be a little bit more real of what happened there, because there appeared to be some inside people, obviously, that wanted to take over. They wanted to be leaders, and all of these things that was a part of Joseph's goals. I can imagine it was just hard to keep track of all the things, especially running for president.
Mhm.
That's a biggie. So I can imagine now that it would be hard to bring all of these into a particular hope for a church, if you will. So it was a very tremendous, tumultuous time of the 1840s and 50s there. And again, the secrecy is a concern. There is also, when you say those who can bind, what actions you can do to bind to Joseph Smith. Whoa, that's a red flag for me, because you are a leader because people choose to follow you, not something that you cause and make happen. So boy, there was all kinds of dynamics to that time of church history.
And I can really see that fear and identify with it. Although we have to also remember that we do the same thing when we make covenants to Jesus Christ, for example, and he has said that he would draw us to him and try to bind us to him. And that is what we're going for in our connection to the Savior. So, you can see it from both perspectives. You really can.
I'm finished, by the way. Well, not really, but.
Okay. All right.
For the moment.
Rick, it's your turn. Go ahead, please.
Okay. What do Masons have between each other that Christians don't have between each other?
Well, I mean, I would say that's maybe the kind of the same thing, but in different ways. Masonry doesn't. I think that Christians would have more. Masonry doesn't pretend to be a religion, so it doesn't offer ordinances. It doesn't offer. It says it's a handmaid to religion, so I think it intends to support religion. So I would say that Freemasons don't really have much and don't pretend to have something that Christianity does not have.
Okay, so it's another, like a club, organization, a tool. You had said that it helped you learn more about God or something like that. If I'm misquoting it, I apologize. So I guess you kind of led to my next question was, is Freemasonry a church?
No, it does not pretend to be a church or religion, although it has quite a bit of a Christian background, and the symbolism can be seen as a very Christian.
So would it be considered a Christian organization, or can non-Christians join it? And
non-Christians can join it. They do ask that you believe in a supreme being. That's the only thing, that's the only requirement, is that you believe in a supreme being, but that can be defined however you want to have it defined.
okay.
So there are Muslims that are Freemasons, and all different kinds of religious backgrounds.
Okay, you can choose not to answer this next question if it's too secret.
Okay.
But, you know, from what I've learned of the ritual of Freemasons, you know, is probably, you know, from National Geographic or, you know, other renditions, was secret teller, you know, people that have divulged. But the oath that you take, if you reveal the secrets, that they will, you know, what, cut your throat, cut your guts out, and maybe there was one other cut somewhere. I don't remember. So,
Yes, the penalties that are very, very grisly, you know, but you have to remember that these are symbolic, you know. I don't think that the vast majority of Freemasons would tell you this is symbolic. They don't think that that's meant to be something that will. But see, this is what caused the Morgan affair, is that when Morgan threatened to reveal the secrets, he was kidnapped and probably murdered by Masons. And so that's when people started getting very upset about it and saying, this is not right for them to have these, you know, these oaths that, you know, that they'll get killed. So,
I guess the symbolism really played out in that case.
it did. And we don't know that Morgan was, it's never been proved that he was murdered. We don't know that, but I personally think he was killed by Masons, and many other people did too. So yeah, it was played out in that case. Yeah.
All right, thanks again.
Okay, so let's see if we've got anything else in our questions. I see there's lots of comments. I haven't looked at all of them.
Let's see.
Okay, so the Masons are divided into two rites, the Scottish and another rite.
That's kind of a really simplistic way of putting it, but when I studied Masonry, I studied a very narrow section of Freemasonry. I studied the 18th century or the 19th century Freemasonry that Joseph Smith was involved in, which is a Blue Lodge Masonry. So I did not get into the Scottish Rite very much at all. This is a little bit of what Robert was talking about when he explained how you can go to the 32nd degree. Many people think that Joseph Smith was a 32nd degree Mason. He was not. He just had the 3 Blue Lodge degrees. So let's see what else is in here.
Rick quoted John 14:26, but the Comforter, which is the Holy Ghost, whom the Father will send in my name, he shall teach you all things and bring all things to your remembrance whatsoever I have said unto you. Oops,
Shouldn't it be the Holy Spirit that leads the believer into truth? Absolutely. And I don't think Masons would object to that statement.
Several people have thanked you for your presentation. Michael was one of them. He's looking forward to the John Whitmer next month in Independence.
Okay, so Aspie says concerning the statement made that all persons who have a degree, e.g. elder, can do all things. Yeah, I don't know that that's something that he says, I know it is not correct. I don't think that that's something that we believe that people who have a degree can do all things. No, not all things can be done. Some things need to be done in the temple, and in a temple you have temple workers. And on top of that, a limited number of persons can do the sealing. Oh, okay. So I see what he's saying. He's saying that as an elder, are you able to, you know, do you have all the priesthood you need to, you know, I guess, participate in all the ordinances, and that's not true, because there is a hierarchy that certain people can only do the sealings and that. Yeah, you're right on that. But I don't think that really has to do with Freemasonry so much as it's the LDS Church. Is it your position that the Book of Mormon is not historical, meaning an ancient text from ancient golden plates? Oh, okay, that's a very personal question. And I have to say that I have kind of gone back and forth on that during my life. I can't tell you for sure. I'm sort of agnostic on that. I don't believe that I believe it could have been a historical, and at certain times I have more faith that it was historical, and certain times I don't. So that's just me. Okay, what else do we have? Oh, is that all?
I guess so.
Yeah, okay. All
Okay,
right.
let's see, Paul's got his hand up again. Go ahead, Paul.
Okay. I think you're muted, Paul.
Yes, you are.
Okay.
Okay, I'm curious about the artifacts. You indicated that you thought the sword was probably allegorical rather than real. But we look back at what you said about the crowbar and the pickaxe and the spade. And I work as an archaeologist and use those tools to some extent. And I'm not sure that the Masons would generally approve of what I'm doing. Because well, I'm often dismantling what they have done, trying to figure out what's underneath. That question then of the nature of the tools that we see ascribed here, and then the symbolism that you attributed to them, strikes me as being fascinating. And yet the fact that I use those same tools for very different purposes than the Masons do. I mean, Masons use a trowel for slopping on the mud to hold the bricks together, and I use that trowel to scrape all of the dirt out of the way so that I can see what the artifacts, the cultural material underneath.
Yeah.
I find it just an interesting, intriguing comparison, because it seems like I'm usually at the wrong end of things.
Well,
My brother says that I can't walk by a wasp nest without swatting it. Looking for
well, I think that's very interesting, and this is one of the reasons why Masons aren't so strict on what their interpretations are of these different things, because for different people it might mean something else. Like for you, the trowel has a very different meaning, but you could use that allegorically. You could definitely use that allegorically, and talk about how that would help you, in your religious quest, so yeah.
Well, the psalmist indicates the truth shall spring forth from the earth.
You could do it. That's what Masons do. They do that. They make those connections and those allegories and make them meaningful to their own lives.
Thank you so much for your fine presentation and the challenging questions you had to address. I don't see any other hands up, and that commonly means, since we're approaching 10 o'clock Central Time, then it's time to sing off and give other people a chance to have further conversation afterwards if they wish. But my wife is ready to sing. Good night. The Lord is watching o'er you. Good night. His blessings go before you. Good night. And we'll be praying for you. So good night. May God bless you. Good night. And if you want to stick around and chat, you can.